Zimbabwe has been elected to a non-permanent two-year term on the United Nations Security Council, the third time the country will be represented on the body mandated to maintain international peace and security. Zimbabwe will replace Somalia on the council, whose term ends on December 31st, and will join the Democratic Republic of Congo and Liberia on the council as part of the A3 in 2027. Austria, Portugal and Trinidad and Tobago were also elected, while the Philippines and Kazakhstan will go to a runoff for the final and fifth seat after neither received the two-thirds majority to secure the seat. This was the moment the results were announced.
The required two-thirds majority and the largest number of votes. Austria, Portugal, Trinidad and Tobago and Zimbabwe are elected members of the Security Council for a two-year term beginning on January 1st, 2027. There still remain one seat to be filled from among the African and Asia-Pacific states.
I would want to say this moment has a lot of meaning, first of all to Africa, that Africa stands with one voice. To Zimbabwe is a very humbling experience that we are able to represent our continent in the Security Council. So it's a humbling moment, it's a moment of responsibility. 182 votes, which was the highest today, is a very humbling experience, but at the same time, it tells us that we have a lot of work to do, and work begins. So we believe that working with all 193 members of the United Nations family, we will be able to get, to the best of our ability, the solutions that bedevil this world, from issues of climate change to issues of conflicts, basically advocating for multilateralism and making sure that we all sit at the table and talk about the problems of this world and solve them with diplomacy, not with weapons.
Well, for more on this, we speak to U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's been watching the elections play out. Sherwin, this, of course, is a significant moment for Zimbabwe, particularly given that it was voted in by an overwhelming majority. But this is also a council that isn't known to get much done. Talk us through those details.
Yeah, that's a fair comment, Oliver. You and I have had many discussions about how this council, whose mandate is the maintenance of international peace and security, often falls short. But I will say Zimbabwe getting 184 votes out of the 193 member states. Not everybody voted, so it's not absolutely a reflection, but essentially the calculus goes like this. You need two-thirds majority of those present and voting. Zimbabwe got 184 votes, Trinidad and Tobago 181, Portugal 134. A very tight competition between Austria and Germany. Germany falling short with 104 votes, not reaching the two-thirds threshold. Austria goes through with 131. And then Kyrgyzstan and Philippines had to go through 3 additional rounds of voting for the winner to be determined. And much later, Kyrgyzstan getting 142 to the Philippines' receding number of votes. And they will now make up the 5 new non-permanent seats to take up their council membership on the 1st of January 2027. But you're quite right. As much as this is an accolade for Zimbabwe, if you think about where Zimbabwe has come from the last 2 decades, right? The farm invasions in 2000, the imposition of sanctions from the United States, the EU in the main, those sanctions, of course, being lifted in the last 2 years. So a major turnaround in terms of who it will be sharing that seat, that council with. The United States will be there, EU countries will be there, France, the United Kingdom and others. And so very much a sea change in terms of how Zimbabwe is again being welcomed by the international community. I also asked Professor Murirwa about specific issues as it pertains to the conflict in the Middle East right now that you and I have talked a lot about, and also the big intractable conflict that has developed over the last few years in Sudan. This was that exchange. Watch. Position on that, and what sort of experience would you bring in terms of that?
We always talk about diplomacy. Diplomacy is the solution to our problems. No weapon can solve anything. Weapons cause death. Diplomacy causes peace.
The situation in Sudan, of course, just to take it back to the African continent, this has been a complex issue, even for the AU, for IGAD, the UN, to resolve. How do you see this playing out in the months ahead?
We are always saying there is nothing that beats sitting together in the multilateral environment and talking about the problems that bedevil us and be able to solve them. In actual fact, when you look at the UN Charter and when you look at Zimbabwe's constitution itself, it talks about respect of international law, peaceful coexistence of nations, as well as when there's a dispute that has happened, always sit down and solve them through diplomacy.
When customers decide to sell their vehicle, especially a broken vehicle, they normally determine their pricing by
diplomacy.
And Oliver, when that idealism crashes into reality, I'll be here to tell you all about it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about something else, parenthetical to this matter, and that is new tariffs being faced by South Africa. When I recently spoke to Trade Minister Park Stawu on this matter, he raised this as an ongoing contention and an ongoing point of negotiation between South Africa and the U.S. Now, the United States Trade Representative proposed new tariffs for 60 economies, which includes South Africa. And this is related to what they describe as a failure to do enough on forced labor. Talk us through the details of that.
So we knew this was coming after the Supreme Court struck down the reciprocal tariff regime that was first imposed by the United States. The first time we talked about it was on the 2nd of April last year. And of course, it was only implemented in August that year, and then it went through various court processes, and then finally got struck down by the US Supreme Court in March. And so that was already choreographed in terms of the Section 301 investigation that was launched by the U.S. Trade Representative, Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act of 1974. And essentially, I just want to read you what it allows. It allows the U.S. Trade Representative the authority, Oliver, to investigate foreign trade practices that are deemed unfair, discriminatory, or in violation of international trade agreements, and to retaliate, often by imposing tariffs, to protect U.S. commerce. So essentially what they're saying is, if a country is importing goods from another country where forced labor is the practice in creating those goods, then you are now going to be liable for this 10% or 12.5% tariff, depending on which category you fall in. South Africa is among a group of countries, about 45 countries, where that will receive a 12.5% additional tariff that is likely to be implemented sometime in July after some public a process is held, some public hearings on these tariffs are imposed. And essentially the report from the Trade Representative's Office alleges, Oliver, that South Africa failed to impose and effectively enforce a forced labor import prohibition, calling it unreasonable and that it burdens and restricts U.S. commerce. Now, I will say this, South Africa is not alone in this instance. The markets were not very happy about this announcement today, closing in the red. And I think what you are going to see is something similar to what we saw with the reciprocal tariffs. This will be challenged in the courts. It will go through the process, and we might get a decision a year from today. We have had some reaction already from various economies that are mentioned, including the EU. The EU says the U.S. investigation effectively is baseless and argued that Washington was using legal justifications to support tariffs it had already decided to impose. Countries like the UK, Canada, Japan, Australia, and Mexico have questioned why they were included despite already having laws or agreements aimed at preventing imports linked to forced labor. Brazil's president spoke a short time ago, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He says we cannot accept the treatment of the U.S. that the U.S. has given to Brazil this week. It's unacceptable. We are surprised at the decision to issue another tax regarding Brazil. China, a foreign ministry spokesperson says there is no so-called forced labor in China, and we oppose using this as an excuse for political manipulation. So you're getting this sort of negative reaction from around the world, and one imagines that this is going to continue in addition to some court processes, I imagine.
Global governance with Southern Africa at the center stage. Zimbabwe has been elected for a non-permanent 2-year term on the United Nations Security Council, the third time the country will be represented on the body mandated to maintain international peace and security. Zimbabwe replaces Somalia on the council, whose term ends on the 31st of December, and joins the Democratic Republic of Congo and Liberia on the council as part of the A3 in 2027. Austria, Portugal, and Trinidad and Tobago were also elected, while Kyrgyzstan beat the Philippines for the final and fifth seat after several rounds of voting. It's a big moment for Zimbabwe, isn't it? Elected to the UN Security Council with an overwhelming majority, but also, you know, let's face it, elected to a council that isn't known really for getting much done in terms of the work at hand of maintaining international peace and security.
Absolutely well said, Tula Sizwe, but let's not take the joy away from the moment, right? A lot of lobbying happens, a lot of political capital and diplomatic capital is put into the process of lobbying member states. And Zimbabwe ending up with the highest number of votes at the General Assembly endorsing its candidacy. They got 184 votes in favor. Trinidad and Tobago, 181. Portugal, 134. Each country has to reach a two-thirds majority, and that's around 123 to 127, depending on how many member states voted. And then what was also interesting was this competition between Austria and Germany. You'll know that the president of the GA, Annalena Baerbock, is the former foreign minister of Germany, and she had to basically announce that Austria had basically pipped Germany. Germany got 104 votes, Austria 131, and then a number of runoff votes between Kyrgyzstan and the final rounds. Kyrgyzstan beating them out there with 142 votes. So those are the new 5 members that will serve non-permanent seats on the council. But understand also that they walk into a complex scenario where this council has been very ineffective on the maintenance of international peace and security. Just mention the conflict. And, certainly don't look at the council for resolving those. I asked the Zimbabwe foreign minister, the minister also for international trade, about the conflict in the Middle East and Sudan, and this was some of that exchange.
I think it is important, therefore, to refer to what Zimbabwe stands for in terms of our national objective. As Zimbabwe, our national objective is to build a free and democratic society that is sovereign, where people are prosperous, happy, and fulfilling lives. You would refer yourself to Chapter 2 of the Constitution and Section 8 thereof, where this is well stated. These objectives of a happy people with fulfilling lives who are prosperous can only take place in a peaceful and cooperative world that respects the sovereign equality of states, where Zimbabwe is a responsible member of this international community. We then go and look at the importance of respecting international law, which is in our constitution, peaceful coexistence of this country with its neighbors near and far, as well as the peaceful resolution of any disputes that might arise in this world. But most of all, Section 12, subsection 2 of the same constitution says Zimbabwe shall belong to Africa as a Pan-Africanist country, but belong to the United Nations and take its responsibility for the promotion of peace, progress, and upward movement of humanity. So if you look at it and that the Constitution is the expression of the will of the Zimbabwean people, it means Zimbabwe has to participate in the international environment in which it can curve its place, where the prosperity can be experienced, where we have happy and fulfilling lives. But it cannot come cheap, it has to come with responsibility.
Tula Sizwe?
Yeah, so Shawan, that was the Zimbabwean Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Amon Murirwa, speaking to you a bit earlier on. So while we have you on the line then, yeah, you are going to pick up?
I was just going to say that was not my discussion with the minister. We had a discussion about, I asked him specifically about the war in the Middle East and the situation in Sudan. And just to give you a sort of summary of what he said to Lasizwe, yes. He explained that diplomacy was the main objective in terms of Zimbabwe's deliberations here, that the peaceful settlement of disputes, essentially what the UN Charter speaks to, is what they will be bringing to the Council. But let's wish them good luck in that scenario, because it's a very complicated thing to implement, given just how ineffective this Council has been.
All right. Let's move on to another topic, though, Shawan, very quickly. We are used to tariffs coming from one quarter, the White House, via a decree or, executive order signed with that corky pen and communicated on Truth Social. But another round of tariffs appears to be headed towards 60 countries, including South Africa. And this time around, it's not coming from the White House, but from the Office of the United States Trade Representative.
Yeah, and we got a sense that this was coming right after the Supreme Court in March of this year struck down the reciprocal tariffs that were first choreographed by the US president. You mentioned the Koki pen, we call it a Sharpie in this part of the world. And of course, striking down those tariffs. And then you had an announcement by the trade representative in March that he would be initiating an investigation. And this investigation has been done in terms of Section 301 of the US Trade Act of 1974. And what that says to Lasizwe is that it empowers the trade representative, it gives them the authority to investigate the foreign trade practices that are deemed unfair, discriminatory, or in violation of international trade agreements, and to retaliate often by imposing tariffs to protect US commerce. So what does that mean in this instance? South Africa was included in that investigation along with 59 other trading economies with the United States. The investigation was designed to determine whether countries had, listen to this, failed to impose and effectively enforce prohibitions on imports made with forced labor. So this is not the imposition of a new levy because there's forced labor in these countries, particularly in South Africa. This